Well, good evening and welcome to another episode of Porch Talk. I, of course, am Paul W. Marino. Ed is not with us tonight. He is at home, but we do have Tim Zalazzo here. And Tim, while we start to talk about Ed, I would like to remind our director that this is a live call-in show and we need the phone to do that. The phone box.
Okay. When's the last time someone's called in?
Oh, about a year ago.
Okay. Yeah. All right. This could be the night they want to call, right? Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. Okay, Joanne. Well, actually, before I get to the photo, Ed was not here the last time that I did a live show. And that was not this past 2 weeks ago, but the time before that, the third Friday in September. And I assumed that he was he'd just gotten in late or something. But then I got a call from him. He was in the hospital. He was in the hospital in Saratoga Springs, I think. And then later he got moved to Albany Med. And he is home now, but he is not allowed to leave the house, at least until the end of this month. So he did explain to me what was wrong, and I believe it has something to do with his platelets. His blood, but I really don't remember. But the important thing is he is sitting at home right now, hopefully watching us. And Ed, we want you to get better, so take as long as you need. We can keep things running. It won't be as good as having you here. But yes, we will keep the show going in your absence. But please, do get better soon and get back in here because we do miss you.
Yeah, and I talked to him a couple days ago, and the last thing I asked him if he still had an appetite, and he said he did, which was good. He's tired, and since my talk with him, I've did a little reading on what do they call it? The CBC, your blood count. He's been having a lot of blood exams, and basically you got four things with your blood: your plasma, your red cells, your white cells, and then your platelets. And your platelets are different than, they're not really cells, they're parts of cells. But it was pretty interesting. About 55% of your blood is plasma, which is your water, sugar, protein. Your red cells are basically what they call bioconcave. They're like a donut, but they don't have a nucleus, so they can fit through all these little crooks and crannies, okay? And as they're transporting, oxygen to your lungs and the CO2 out. And then your white blood cells, basically, they help fight infection.
Yep.
And then the platelets, basically, what's the word they use? They not coagulate. I'm trying to think of the word if there's an injury, they go to that injury spot and they start to protect that injury or try to heal it. So, so his platelets.
And of course, that's where you get the scab from.
Right. So I guess his platelets are fairly low, and they're still trying to understand if there's a virus or something that's causing it. But Ed, get better, okay? Get better.
Amen to that. So, Joanne, would you please put the photo in front? No, actually, don't bother putting the photo in front of us. For one thing, I can't remember what it was about this picture that I wanted to ask a question of. And since we don't have the phone here with us, we can't take calls anyway.
Yeah, well.
Oh, here she comes. All right, so while we're waiting for the phone, Why don't we talk about what you have here?
Well, a couple weeks ago, I helped a friend in town, pretty close to the old Nathan Jury farm up in
so
Florida.
you mean in Florida?
In Florida,
Yes.
yeah, Florida, Mass. And I've been also working with a few scientists that do the championship program for American Forest, which is one of the oldest conservation magazines. And after I dropped a couple 80-foot trees, one was a hemlock. I dropped 5 trees, but one was a hemlock, and it was about 140 years old. I started thinking, I dropped this one next to it.
That must have been nice for a change.
2 foot in diameter red spruce. This cracking, we can talk about that in a little while. But I started thinking, when I knew Ed wasn't going to be able to make it, I started thinking yesterday, I've been dealing with a bunch of things, and what we've been doing is, I've been working on a farm doing forest management, and I'm using historic aerials, and I'm zooming down on areas, and say in 1940, if it was a field, and I cut a tree that was there a month ago, because I'm cutting a road in a plantation, that the tree should be just about 80, 84 years old. And which one was it right here? Well, we'll talk about, this is a pine tree that was 84 years old. So then I got thinking, white pine. And I started thinking about...
Oh, it looks like modern art on the back.
Well, on the back, we're going to talk about, we're going to get into the King's Broad Arrow and how important white pine was. A lot of people don't realize it, but actually it was what was the real start or fulcrum for the War of Independence. And we're going to talk about the Pine Tree Riot. The Pine Tree Riot and how it happened. But I started thinking, okay, this tree was 140 years old, this hemlock, and actually this one farther back was a little older, 140-something years old. And I started thinking, 140 years ago, Adams and North Adams had just divided.
Thank you.
That was about well, the census in 1875 was about 15,000 people. So, and then North Adams was incorporated in what, 1885, 80, or 78, I think.
Yeah, 1878, it became the town of North Adams.
And then it was then it became a city in 1898. So these trees actually
96.
96, okay. So these trees actually started growing right around that time. And I started thinking, once on one of the shows we talked about North Adams being called Slab City because there were so many white pines. Yeah, I didn't realize it, but the river was there, so it was a kind of like
actually, I think it was Slab City because they cut so much lumber that they had slabs left over, and those were used for building purposes.
Right. They sold the best lumber, and they used the slabs to build their houses, which were shanties. Yeah. Okay? So that's where it came from, Slab City. So I've been working with, like I said, a few scientists, and we've been trying to understand some of the pine trees in different facilities in Berkshire County. And some of them are 175 feet tall, 150 feet tall. And back when the pine tree riots happened, they were cutting pine trees that were, some of them 220 feet. Okay, people don't realize that back 200-300 years, when Captain Weymouth came down in 1605 down the coast, at that time they almost referred to Maine as Virginia, but when he came down in his ship, I think it was called the Archangel, they were amazed at the size of the white pine trees. And the white pine trees were probably one of the most valuable things at that time.
Now, they're called white because of the color of the wood. Is that correct?
It's a white wood, correct. It's called Eastern white pine. Over in England, they called it the Weymouth, and it wasn't after the captain, it was after Lord Weymouth. But they had depleted all the tall trees in England and in Europe, in that area, and the reason they were so important was because the British Royal Navy needed the white pine for mast, M-A-S-T. It's like a pole. A mast is a pole. So in 16...
What you hung the sails from.
The sails. Right. Yes. They'd have the main mast, which they could... They were putting masts that were 40 inches in diameter at the bottom as the main mast, 3 feet in diameter in the foremast.
Be careful, you're going to knock your tea over.
Okay, well, we got it. Okay, so what they did in 1692, I think it could have been King William or King George, they went in all the trees that were 2 feet in diameter, 1 foot from the stump, 1 foot from the ground. They put a king's arrow on. They called it the king's broad arrow. And no one could touch that tree. And these trees were as straight as could be. Some of them didn't. Their first branch was 120 feet up. So the king's arrow was a practice that they called them survey generals would go, and they would, with a big, small axe, they would couple 3 snaps into the tree.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of the colonists weren't obeying the law. And
surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise. And, you know, this was for quite a while. It was being overlooked. And there was a little upset people about the sugar tax and the stamp tax, okay? But I can't think of the first governor of Massachusetts. He started to crack down too with the...
Would it have been Shirley? Governor Shirley?
I can't think of the guy's name right now. But they basically went, and anyone that bought property in the colony, in New Hampshire, Vermont, anyone that bought property, before you could cut a tree, you had to get a license, like a building permit. You had to get a license, you had to pay a fee, and the survey general would come on your land and they'd mark trees. And if you couldn't cut certain trees on your property, and some trees that you did cut, you had to pay a tax for. So imagine today if we were doing that with people. The city of North Angeles or Florida was getting money for. So what happened was that they clamped down and they went to a bunch of mills and they found hundreds and hundreds of just these huge masts for the ships that were being cut illegally for the people on the coast. They were cutting them for lumber. We'll talk about lumber. So they started to round them up. They were going to round them up and start arresting them. Well, a bunch of them, they painted their faces so they couldn't be recognized, and they went and they had little swaths of probably pine boughs, but they went and they basically destroyed the records in the sheriff's offices and did a good job wailing on the people that were going to arrest them. The judge kind of felt sorry for him. He was he let him go, and that was let's see. The Boston Tea Party was 1773. This was about 1772. So from they started pulling masks out of Maine and New Hampshire right around 1634. And these things were amazing. I don't know if people realize it, but the trees that were 200, 250 feet tall around here, you don't see them anymore. They're pretty much gone. The tallest trees are probably down in Charlemont around here, the white pine that are about 175 feet tall. And one of the reasons they didn't want to, they were taking the white pine and they were let's see here. They were cutting lumber, okay, because they needed the money, people needed to build, and these masks, they would cut them. One story I read the other day from the Maine Historic Society, They basically drop trees in the wintertime, and in the wintertime they pull them by oxen, and one of the biggest trees they cut, it took 52 teams of oxen. That was 104 teams of oxen to pull it 3 miles to the Merrimack River, and from the Merrimack River they would float it down to the ocean.
In the spring.
In the spring, okay? So I'm trying to show here.
Puts me in mind of the song, The Jam on Jerry's Rock.
Okay, let's see here. Trying to put this in. I got a,
Yeah,
I got a board
you're there.
right here. Okay, this is a pine board. And if you look at the end of this, there was 2 types of ways.
Here, hand it over here.
Okay, I want to show them the end of it. What I'm trying
Yes.
to show is what is called plain sawn and what is quarter sawn. Plain sawn, and we're going back a couple hundred years. Today they have horizontal band saws, so you can have your log on there and they can take the first sweep and cut the top off, cut the next slab, and if you look here, I marked the annual rings, the growth rings, on this one and the end of that one. This is what plain saw looks like. And people that have radiant heat in their house, a lot of the plumbers were getting blamed for the floors starting to heave. But when you have floorboards and they're plain sawn, they cup up.
Yeah, they start to curl with the growth rings.
With the growth rings. You got it, okay? And then quarter sawn is a more expensive wood, and there's more waste and it's more time consuming. But basically what you're doing is you're quartering the log, and you're looking to cut in various places where all your annual rings go perpendicular, 90 degrees. You can actually go, some people say, let me look here.
So, well, let's just call this down. So instead of the growth rings going this way, they go this way.
Right. They go at a 90-degree angle.
Yes.
70 to 90 degrees is quarter sawn. And the reason why it takes more time, because you keep having to flip the log, cut it in a quarter, but the board that you cut is a lot more stable, and it doesn't cup. And most of your fine furniture and your floors are quarter sawn. And we can get into moisture content, but since I've got this up, let's see here, I want to talk about...
All right, while you're dealing with that,
Yep.
Joanne, could we have the photo in front of us, please? Thank you. Now, there are 3 mills visible here. This photo was taken in the 1940s. And so there are 3 mills visible here. What I want to know is, what were the names of the companies in them? So if you have a guess for that, please give us a call, 664-4408. If you have just a wild guess, please give us a call and take a guess at this. You just might surprise yourself.
Oh, I think I know where that is.
We'll see.
I think.
All right, so Joanne, you can show us again.
Okay.
So either of the 2 of you that are watching, please give us a call and take a guess as to who owned those companies.
Okay. I brought this here to show what a tangential cut is. If you were cutting this log right here and cutting the first slab off, in the old days, 200 years ago, they would have to cut it. They had saws that would go up and down, either from water power. Out west, they used horses, but everything was up and down, and they cut it from the sides with a horizontal.
Yeah, probably water power.
Water power, right. So when you cut a slab, a plain sawn, they call it a tangential cut. And this is the figure of what your board looks like. Okay, this is a, let's see here. This piece of wood right here, this 140-year-old hemlock, they call this a transverse plane or a transverse section. When you quarter saw, it's called a radial longitudinal, and this is a tangential cut. And actually, I was doing some research for 2 months this summer, going down 2 feet below a tree to study the whole root system, and this was actually the first cut I had to take off one of the big roots because I was going down and cutting cookies every 2 inches. We were trying to understand a double tree occultation. How was it 1 tree, 1 root system? Was it 2 trees, 3 trees? Anyways, that's a whole nother story. So basically, when you look at a cookie, every tree's got a pith, which is the center of the tree where the tree started. And then you have this doesn't show the heartwood really. This is a piece of oak.
Well, let me ask you something before you get away from that. I noticed that the core is not dead center.
Okay, right.
So why would this side of the tree grow thicker than this side?
Good question. Good question.
Well, you see, I'm not just another ugly face.
Okay, good question. I wasn't going to get into that. It's called reaction wood. This is a piece of oak. My wife used it she was going to use it as a little cutting block. We got a lot of cutting things, but I want to I'll use this, but if you look at hardwood and try to imagine this tree being on a slope, okay, what happens is your pith is always down on the downhill side, and your reaction wood on hardwood is on the uphill side, your compression wood, to straighten the tree out. Okay? This tree, softwood, we're talking hardwood, angiosperm, softwood is gymnosperm. It's just the opposite with a softwood or a pine. This tree was growing on a slope, and the pith was on this side, and your reaction wood or your compression wood was on the bottom, trying to straighten the tree out to grow straight. Okay, so very good, Paul. Keep it up. All right, this piece of wood right here is oak. I can't remember if this was about 80 years old. It was taken off a section 20, 30 feet up a tree I had to drop. The pith is here. Next thing from the pith is what they call your heartwood. Then you have your sapwood, and in this case it's very small. Your sapwood
is where the sap flows.
Okay, it's your sapwood. Then you have your cambium, and most of the tree is dead. Okay, I can't stress this enough. Most of every tree is dead except for your cambium.
Yeah, the outer ring, because that's where it grows.
That's where it grows. You have, on the inside, you have of your cambium ring, this is where the only place where the cells are being divided in a tree. The xylem your xylem is basically your growth rings. And your growth rings, that's how I could determine how old these trees were, by counting the growth rings.
Now, I should add here that people do not have growth rings. So they're not our growth rings, they are the tree's growth rings.
Right. I'm wondering, is there any way with people we can tell, any way they can tell on our body how old we are? There really isn't.
No, I think what they have to do is cut us in the middle and then count the rings.
Yeah, well, yeah. Okay. All right.
Oh, I hate when that happens. That really hurts.
Yeah, I'm trying to think though, Paul. No. Bones, no. So every year, the cambium layer to the inside, the xylem, which your xylem is really It's the conduit, it's the transport. It conducts water from the roots up to the top of the tree. On the other side of the cambium layer is your phloem. Some call it phylum, phloem. That basically is pushing out and the tree, as the tree grows out. Your bark is dead too. Everything is dead. The only thing live in a tree is in this tree, or every tree, but in this tree is the small cambium layer right here. And it's probably hard to see in here, but you'll see all these rays, parenchyma rays, medullary rays. They're basically vascular rays. As the cambium grows, or the tree grows, the ray basically is the only live tissue in the tree. Okay, and that's what's feeding the nutrients. And hardwood has different cells. Softwood has tracheids and vessels where the water, as it's conducted or transported up, goes through pits in the cells. Okay, so you can't be deceived by the size of a tree. Sometimes on a good growing season, you can have large annual rings or growth rings that are, a quarter inch or an inch. Dendrochronologists have been studying the growth rings of trees. They've got a database of about 30,000, and I found an interesting article just recently that
Yeah, that's good.
in Rhode Island, they built a whaling ship. It was one of the last ones, called the Dolphin. Archaeologists down in Argentina have been digging it up for 20 years. And what they did was they got the dendrochronologists. Well, actually, first, the archaeologists were really, really against cutting some cross sections off the ship that they found. They were digging it up. They cut about 20 cross sections, and those cross sections were white oak that came from the coast of New England. So the whaler ship was about 170 years old when it set sail from Rhode Island. The oak rings were about 156 years old, so it went back about 300-something years. But dendrochronologists have been using the growth rings to also understand climate change, like they do when they dig down in the ice. Okay, you can tell what happened. But this is an oak. And when I say you can't be deceived by the size of the diameter of a tree, this is, I forgot to bring my striped maple. We had one of the champion striped maples. It's 7 inches in diameter. It just fell. It was 69 feet tall. This is striped maple. Striped maple usually is a small tree. But this tree right here is a hardwood. It's ironwood. This tree is 50 years old. This is very dense wood. It's about 51 pounds a cubic foot. And in the old days, they used ironwood for, in front of saloons, they'd tie your horses to them because they were so strong. So, the closer that your growth rings are, the
denser the wood and the stronger it is.
And when you count an annual ring, what's important, when you count an annual ring, you'll see white, and then you'll see a dark part of the ring. Probably hard to see on this one. Maybe the oak will show it up better.
No, actually, put it back up there because she was zooming in a bit.
Okay. All right. And what I've been doing to get an exact count, because we're all, one scientist is putting them into an Excel program to help count them. I've been taking macro pictures of just the first inch and a half, and you'd be amazed. This tree right here, the first inch and a half might have 35, 40 years. Okay, but when you look at an annual ring, I think this might be the best one to show it. you'll see a dark part and a white part. The light part is what they call your early wood, your spring wood. And that's when a lot of nutrients and water is going up, being transported. And then the dark part of the ring is called the late wood or summer wood. And that's more structural property. The cells actually start to almost double inside. I could draw what the cell structure looks like. And that gives the tree the strength, more so than the white part. So your annual ring has a white, I guess maybe this would be the best one, as your, let's see, maybe not.
Yeah, go with that one.
Yeah. Your annual ring has a white part to each growth ring and a black or a dark part of the growth ring, which is your late wood. And then in a rainforest, you wouldn't see growth rings because they're growing all the time. Okay? We have seasons, and the seasons, the tree gets dormant around here, so the tree stops growing. So in the spring, we go back to your cambium layer. Your cambium starts the xylem and your phloem and starts developing your growth ring. Okay, so a little wood anatomy tonight.
A little. Oh.
But I think what I really wanted to focus on was, well, the election's coming up. We don't talk politics, but the pine tree riot was, her history doesn't reflect it, but a year before the Boston Tea Party, the pine tree riot was really, I think, the fulcrum that started that war of independence. And what was ironic was all the guys that helped, or all the people that were involved in cutting the masts and dragging them to the Merrimack River, okay? And they didn't have squares in New Hampshire, they had triangles, and there was a reason for it, Paul. They had to drag these 200, 150-foot masts through the town. So what was ironic was that they worked so hard building all these masts for the British Royal Navy, and then they ended up bringing the ships back over to the States, or to the Bay Colony, and using it to fight us. So, and
that's understandable.
Vermont's state flag still has the pine tree. The pine tree was on one of the first coins. I can't remember the date, but the eastern white pine is a symbol of independence, and I hope we can keep it in this country. I hope we can keep.
Amen.
Okay, so I pretty much covered what I wanted to, Paul.
Wow.
Ed, I wanted you to be here, Ed, to go through this with you. Okay, so.
Well, if you go to his house, he'll be a captive audience.
Yeah.
Oh!
No, if I go to his house, he's got a dead tree in the back. I'll be cutting more cookies. So. I hope, no, he could have been.
Joan, call an ambulance. Get me out of here.
No.
Joanne, could we have the phone number again, please? Thank you. We want our viewer to be able to call us if he or she wants to. Yeah, I think we lost one somewhere, so we've only got one viewer out there.
One? That's all right.
Yes.
That's all right. The shows, I watched, I think the show that you were alone, you read your novels, your fiction, your what was the name of the town, and I get a kick out of that. New Hampshire. What was it? Yeah, I enjoyed those, Paul.
Thank you. Now you've Webster, New Hampshire.
Yeah, I got a kick out of that when I started reading that. Webster. It doesn't exist, but there is a Webster.
Well, actually, there really is a Webster.
Yeah.
Up near Concord. A budding Concord, and it is a small town, the same as mine. Wow.
Yeah, and Paul, a lot of the pine, that was a big operation there because they had I think it was a Connecticut River They'd bring them down that river for 3 miles to the Merrimack River, and then they'd float them to the Merrimack to the, right where Salisbury Beach is. It comes out into the Atlantic. So that was a big timber. I mean, they were amazed when they landed. When Captain Weymouth landed with his crew, they couldn't believe the size of the timber, but they couldn't believe the fish, the fruit, the wildlife. And they thought they could never deplete it. I mean, in 1630, early in the 1700s, they were debating clear cuts versus selective cutting. I mean, going back that far. Because the average family used about 35 cord of wood every year. And they would just, to clear the fields, they were just dropping.
Not to mention what they were using for building.
Building, right. And so tying it into Slab City, North Adams. I just can't imagine the big, huge pine trees in North Adams. You had the Hoosick River, which was deeper and wider. It was a swamp. This was a tough area. That's why a lot of people were living in Adams. It was the topography or the lay of the land, the landscape was a lot more.
And in Williamstown.
And then I can imagine these huge pine stumps. If you've ever been in a pine forest, pine needles are good for blueberries and something very acidic and it's like a sterile environment. So they were having a hard time growing the vegetables at first, and how they removed the stumps. I know you had mentioned, I think, someone that first invented something, but I don't know how they moved those big stumps, back.
Well, they had oxen, which are huge beasts, and they are pretty powerful. So they would dig around the stump and then put a chain in there and whip up the oxen, and it pulls, and eventually it rips it out.
Well, I guess if they were pulling 10 tons out of the woods, the oxen, I mean, you're talking, 50 teams of oxen, but...
and of course, there were also mules. Mules come in various sizes, depending... I believe the male is the ass. That is a jackass. And the female is some breed of horse.
Really? I didn't know that.
And if you breed a jackass with, say, a Clydesdale, you get a huge mule. And the only thing about mules, they're called stubborn. When a horse gets tired, it will keep working if you force it to. Mules, when they get tired, they're stopping. Hey, I don't care. I need to rest. And they do.
Wow.
So if you had a couple of large mules, they were the equivalent of oxen.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know the males and the females, the part horse, yeah, the King's Arrow. Let's see if I can set this up here. The King's Arrow.
Oh, now I've got a question for you. How did they get the bark off?
The bark?
Yeah.
They actually, matter of fact...
I believe they do it by machine.
No,
today.
well, back a few hundred years ago, what they did is, I couldn't believe it. They used draw knives. Paul. I still use them when I've been.
Oh yeah, so
they use
you pull the knife toward you.
Right.
It's something like a form of. Great, I can't think of the word now. I hate when my brain does this to me.
They have 2 wooden handles.
Yeah.
And when I'm clearing...
Oh, it's kind of like a form of chisel.
Oh, a big... I've got them when I built my timber frame house.
But you...
Oh, yeah, well, the draw knife is got a blade going across it with 2 handles. And I thin out areas where pines are growing that are small, and I'm using them for stair railings, post. So I cut them, and it's like my vegetable garden. I'll thin them out, let them grow. I'll cut the branches off. And so I don't have a lot of knots, okay? Because knots can be interesting. There's live knots and there's dead knots. And if you got a live knot, structurally the timber is strong. If you have a dead knot in your piece of timber,
it's where it can break
It
easily.
falls out, okay? And drying is a whole nother thing too. You can see how this, I cut a thin cookie.
It doesn't look that thin to me. It looks about an inch.
Yeah, this is thin. I dropped a 42-inch diameter oak for the town near my property. It was lifting the road up. I couldn't even pick up the cookies. They were so heavy. But you can see how this is splitting. Okay, it's cracking because I cut it and had it out in the sun.
Now see what you've done.
Cut it and had it out in the sun. And that's what happens if you cut lumber, and there's a certain way of drying it. I mean, today they kiln dry a lot of stuff, but there's a lot of small mills where they cut their 1 inch or whatever they're cutting up to 8x8s, and they basically air dry them. You know,
I have a bad joke here.
Yeah.
This is how the cookie crumbles.
Yeah, it's okay. I like it. Okay, but
Don't do that anymore.
This was up by Nathan Jury's farm, and like I went on to historicaerials.com, zoomed in on the property, looked down, and the 140-year-old tree.
Yeah, he was alive.
He was
when this tree was young.
He died in. I thought Nathan Jury died 1758, maybe 1748. So this tree maybe.
Oh, I don't think so.
Was it?
I think it was later than that, early 1800s.
18? I mean, yeah, okay, 1840 something.
Yeah,
right,
thereabouts.
Okay. And this tree, if it was 140 years old, there was a mass exodus from the farms, 1860, 1870, because North Adams was amazing with the water power. They were coming down into the valley. So they abandoned a lot of the farms. But when I went on, and the historic aerials only goes back to 1940. So that's only 82 years. So some of the things I've been cutting, like this, they're right on. Some trees could have been a few years old. Some people say that, your pith of your tree is, 2-3 years old. Most trees, when they start out, they have a taproot just to hold that little vascular cambium up, That's basically what it is.
Yeah.
And then once it gets growing, it was pretty interesting. I spent a couple months going down this far under a whole double black cherry, and root systems are almost 10% of your tree. And it's pretty amazing. A lot of trees don't have a taproot. They have lateral roots, they have heart roots, they have sinker roots off the lateral roots, and then I don't know how many thousands of hair roots that I cut through small roots that basically that's what picks up the nutrients, the water. Most roots don't go down more than a couple feet. Your sinker roots might go 4 feet, but up where I'm at, you're hitting ledge, you're hitting hard pan. It's tough.
Well, Drat, I had a question. Oh, yes. 1973, I was in Maine. I think that's the last year it was the last year that I was at camp. I remember seeing something that I always wish I'd taken a photo of. There was a white birch with 3 trunks growing out of one trunk, and there in the little patch, there was a little pine tree growing.
In the middle of it.
And I would love to see what had become of that.
Yeah. Well, Paul, that's what we were trying to I was going to bring one of the big cookies down of the two black cherry trees. That was kind of heavy. I went with the light stuff. A lot of they could have been 3 separate trees because it was a pine tree, but I just took some pictures of an area I cut 25 years ago of red maple, and around the red maple stumps, about this big, there were probably anywhere from 8 to 15 trees growing off that stump. They called it the coppice cuts. A lot of people in the old days would cut a tree and they would do it specifically for that so they could go back and not have to deal with a big tree and have nice sized firewood that that was the size that they needed. And that's the thing we were trying to understand. Did these 2 trees, when I kept going down through the cookies, okay, I could have counted maybe at one point 7-9 trees trying to start growing from. Of course, when I looked in the historic maps, that area was right on the border of a field, so that area was cut. I can't remember how old the black cherry tree was, but the trees, they start to grow together, inoculation, and it's almost like natural grafting. And today around a lot of landscape companies, around businesses, that's the new thing. They like planting instead of 1 tree. They like planting 2, 3, 4 trees that don't grow as high. Aesthetically, they're more pleasing. They offer more shade, and that's the new thing. So I cut a cookie off a beech tree I cut. There must have been 25 suckers growing off of that one, and some trees, they have root suckers. Some trees, no suckers grow up, okay? But yeah, basically what you're doing is you're getting suckers growing off of the root, the stump of the tree, and the stump eventually just deteriorates. Some last longer than others, but it just deteriorates and it becomes part of the ground. And then the trees start to grow together. So what I'm going to be doing in the future is looking for trees that are double or triple trees, and up at DBH, diameter breast height, I'm cutting it for firewood. I'll cut at 4.5 feet, then I'll cut another cookie down, and then we'll study it, another cookie, and I'll go right down to the stump and try to understand, how did this tree, was it from 1 seed, 2 seed, does it have 2 root systems, 3 root systems? They're trying to understand that.
Well, we have about 10 minutes left. Oh, good. So, Joanne, would you please put the photo in front of us again? Neither of our viewers called in, so I'm going to give you the opportunity to guess. What are the 3 mills there?
Well, I looked at this, and first I thought it was over by the library, but then I started looking at the way that roof was. And I could be wrong now thinking about it. Because
well, you're not wrong. The library is in shot. It's there in the foreground.
Okay, it's in the. So that would be actually the Eclipse Mill is the farthest one to the left back, and then the other one's the one that's been falling down. There's a facade there. I can tell by the way the roof was. Okay. Then you've got coming down there's the Windsor Mill's in there too.
Yes.
Yeah, the Windsor Mill. I'm trying to think let's see, the Windsor Mill.
Now,
that would be the library, the church. I'm trying to place what church that is. That's the...
that would be Notre Dame.
Okay. All right.
Now, you are correct. That mill that's kind of halfway down is, in fact, the Windsor Mill. And that, for its entire existence, until the company moved out of it, it was a textile mill. Now, the other 2 that are the Eclipse Mill and the other were actually built as one complex.
It had the thing going across?
Yeah, in fact, you can see there's a bridge connecting the 2 of them.
Okay.
Excuse my finger there in the corner of the screen.
No.
But yeah, there is the bridge. There used to be 2 bridges. That mill, that complex was built by the Arnold Print Works.
Okay.
And then around the turn of the century, they moved out, and the Hoosick Mills moved in. That was also a textile company. And then about in the 1940s, when this photo was taken, Sprague Electric moved in there. And they actually only worked in, well, I think they worked on the other side as well, but then they started shutting down the operation in the part with the jagged roof.
Yeah, see, at
And
first
they
I thought
took
that,
out the bridges, and they were renting that space out in the early 70s, mid 70s. That was the Hunter company,
Okay.
not Hunter Machine, but a different company that made down sleeping bags.
Right.
Down-filled sleeping bags.
and then it was mushrooms. Then it was mushrooms. Then they were growing mushrooms.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
they were doing gas
The
masks
Delphi.
across the road in the
Yes.
Eclipse mill.
Now,
Okay.
but before we get off of that mill,
Yeah.
the Delphi mill, in the 1950s, they were making cameras there. Yes, and I have one in my collection.
Okay, yeah.
It's going with me when I go. Yeah, I'll bring it in next
Yeah,
time.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So-
interesting. There's Notre Dame. You know, I'm putting it all together. You know, I first thought when I looked, I thought it was the Greylock mill because that style of the roof on the
Yeah.
Greylock mill looks similar to. Yeah, I don't know what they're going to doing with that. I know that's kind of been.
Yeah,
Better
well, the
than
roof
paper, you know.
collapsed.
The roof
So
collapsed
the
and-
only thing that's standing now are the walls. Thank you, Joanne. You can put us up again, unless you want to spare the audience trauma. We have about 6 minutes left to go. All right, you've shown that off. That's
King
enough
Zero.
now.
Yeah, King Zero.
That's enough now.
Yeah.
There you go. That's a good co-host. Let me ask you something. Do you have a good four-wheel drive vehicle
Yeah, I do.
with good ground clearance?
It's got some ground clearance. Yeah.
All right, because I would like to go look for the Crooked Forest in Savoy.
Yeah, well,
About 1977, which was the year my father died, I went up there with my brother and his wife and their 2 little girls, and we were able to drive in.
Bannis Road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then I heard the Crooked Forest isn't there anymore, and I'd like to see if it really is gone or not.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a lot of mystique about the Crooked Forest. I dealt with a bunch of articles, and one of the CCC, Doc Crozier, told me that the boys used to drive out, their mechanic shop was up there, and the boys would drive out with the Model T, whatever they had, and they'd run over a couple rows of trees, okay? They'd always get in trouble. Then I studied some of the trees, and growing up, my father, we had a Christmas tree plantation.
And we have a phone call.
Oh.
Good evening, and welcome to Porch Talk.
Good evening. Do you 2 guys think you could get away without me there?
Oh, we are at the verge of tears without you here, Ed.
Oh, that's Ed?
That's Ed.
Hey, Ed.
Hey, we're home. We're doing good. Every day's a blessing, and it's good to see you guys there. Thanks for filling in, Tim.
Yeah,
Congratulations, guys.
Thank
We'll
you.
probably see you in November sometime.
okay.
Well,
Ed.
I hope so.
Take care.
Yeah,
Love
be
you
good,
guys.
Yeah, you
Ed.
too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, I'm glad he's well enough to call in.
I thought I was wondering if he made it through the whole show or fell asleep because he's been tired.
Ed, fall asleep during this show? Oh, come on.
Yeah. So, Yeah, I don't know how much time we got, but the Christmas trees.
We've got 3 minutes and
All right.
20 seconds.
The Christmas tree. We would harvest the Christmas tree. My father would leave the bottom whorl. We'd go back a year or two later, leave the 2 best ones. Sometimes you could get 2 more trees, but then you'd go back and cut and leave 1 good one, and and prune it. It'd be a nice tree. So when you see the crooked forest, you know the way they're crooked.
Yeah, it grows up, over, and back up again.
And there's stems or trunks in the middle missing. Sometimes it's crooked like this and the stump's over here. But Doc Crozier at one of our CCC events for the guys that were still alive, Civilian Conservation Corps, that built the foundation of our park system. He said that the guys, when they'd leave the shop, they'd mess around and there was a couple rows of trees they always would drive over. Some people thought it was an ice storm that we had that did it. I mean, until Doc told me that, and then when I studied it, before Doc told me, I thought it was Christmas trees, because they were all Christmas trees, and people were maybe cutting them and leaving. A lot of times people will cut a tree and they'll leave the bottom whorl. All right? It's no different than a pine tree snapping. The top snaps off. I used to climb up and cut a red pine tree sometimes instead of the other Doug firs, and you'd see that the whorl that I left would grow up. Even in nature. In nature, when the tops snap, the bottom, that top whorl continues growing. So, yeah, there isn't much to it, but I know pretty much the area that it was in.
Yeah,
Okay.
And there are a couple of cemeteries there that are rather interesting. In one, there are 2 boys buried there. One of them was swimming in their father's mill pond and started drowning. His brother went in to try to save him, and they both drowned.
Wow. That's in Savoy.
Yeah.
I'm sure the road is right in the center of Savoy, just before the church. You take a left and go up that Bannis Road. That's the way or you can come in off of
Yeah, from Florida.
Adams Road.
Yeah.
You can come off Blackbrook Road, Adams Road, where the fire towers. I don't know the shape of what that road is. I know they were tannery roads in rough shape.
The last time I was up there, my present car is good for light off-road, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And I drove in there part way, and I looked down, and it didn't look passable.
Yeah, with my truck, I'm sure, we'd get to see, but I'm sure that they've kept it up. I know we put a lot of money into it for some timber sales we were doing up there, our department, to get in there. But then again,
Well, we have 30 seconds left. Okay. So, Joanne, thank you very much for directing.
Joanne.
We love you very much. Thank you for watching, all 2 of you. And thank you, Ed, for calling in. Thank you, Tim, for being here and for bringing all this nice firewood.
Independence, we got to keep it. We can't lose it.
So we will see you the first Friday in November. Have a good night.